So, over the weekend, John McCain's funeral took place, and overall, it turned out to be the biggest gathering of American war criminals I think we've ever seen. Because you had individuals like George W. Bush attend his funeral and give a eulogy, and George W. Bush should not be able to attend anyone's funeral because he should be in prison right now for committing crimes against humanity. Because, as you all know, he led us into a war that killed hundreds of thousands of Iraqis, if not more than 1 million. So these individuals are some of the most disgusting members of the American political establishment, and even if they were seemingly there because they wanted to say something about what a hero John McCain was, well, none of these elites wasted any time politicizing this event, and during the speeches that they gave honoring John McCain, many of them chose to take shots at Donald Trump during that time. And to give you some insight into the mindset of individuals within that DC bubble, well, Susan B. Glasser of The New Yorker writes this about the event, quote, "John McCain's funeral was the biggest resistance meeting yet. 2 ex-presidents and 1 eloquent daughter teamed up to rebuke the pointedly uninvited Donald Trump." The biggest resistance gathering yet. We're talking about individuals, again, like George W. Bush, Henry Kissinger. Mike Pence was there. Isn't he supposed to be what the resistance is resisting since he's part of Donald Trump's administration? I mean, if this is the resistance, then we're the establishment, because these are not part of any resistance. They are basically the worst of what American politics has produced over the last couple of decades. And the worst part, I think, for most of us had to be when former president and current war criminal George W. Bush delivered his speech about John McCain.
He was honest, no matter whom it offended. Presidents were not spared. He was honorable, always recognizing that his opponents were still patriots and human beings. He loved freedom with the passion of a man who knew its absence. He respected the dignity inherent in every life, a dignity that does not stop at borders and cannot be erased by dictators. Perhaps above all, John detested the abuse of power, could not abide bigots and swaggering despots. There was something deep inside him that made him stand up for the little guy, to speak for forgotten people in forgotten places.
I think what irritated me the most about that was he clearly wanted to get a few nice articles written, about him because he, quote, took shots at Donald Trump. Because if you really want to get back in the good graces of DC media, you just gotta say something mean about Donald Trump or condemn Donald Trump. And that's all you've got to do. And he said, John McCain was honest no matter who it offended. And then he paused and he said, presidents were not spared. And right when he looked up, right there at that moment, there had to have been at least 12 people in the audience just nut themselves right there, because obviously, it was pretty transparent what he was doing. He was taking a shot at Donald Trump, and you could really see how proud he was of that statement, given the shit-eating look on his face. And it was just disgusting. It was so despicable to see him make a statement and be praised by everyone in that DC bubble. So other things he said, which were just laughable. He also said John McCain respected the dignity inherent in every life, a dignity that does not stop at borders and cannot be erased by dictators. What John McCain is he talking about? Is he talking about a different John McCain than everyone else knew? Because the John McCain we all knew didn't give a fuck about human dignity and life, because there wasn't a single war he didn't vociferously advocate for. How can you say that with a straight face? Well, he could say that with a straight face because George Bush is a war criminal, and his idea of human dignity is a lot different than normal Americans' conception of that notion. And he also said, perhaps above all, John detested the abuse of power, and he also detested bigots and despots. Now, Kyle Kalinske made such a good point about this that I have to parrot it here. John McCain voted for the Patriot Act, one of the biggest abuses of power in American history, and guess what? He also supports Saudi Arabia. Again, how can you say that with a straight face? We are officially living in George Orwell's 1984. War is peace. That's the takeaway from this. They're trying to get us to believe the opposite of what's true. And again, no disrespect to John McCain or his family. I'm just stating the facts about his legacy. Him dying doesn't suddenly make him a hero. Your legacy is what your legacy is. And his legacy, unfortunately for him, was atrocious. He also said there was something deep inside John McCain that made him stand up for the little guy. I'll just say this, citation needed. Because a Code Pink protester was speaking out against John McCain's warmongering and protesting him. And what did he call her? He called her lowlife scum. He never spoke up for the little guy, and he, in fact, tried to step on those few individuals that were brave enough to speak out for the, quote, little guy that George W. Bush is referring to here. But nobody should take anything George W. Bush says seriously because, again, I'll say it for the third or fourth time in this segment, this man is a criminal and he should be locked in prison for murdering hundreds of thousands of Iraqis. But guess what? Because Donald Trump made everyone lose their minds, George Bush's image has been entirely rehabilitated. If you hated George Bush before and you're a liberal, suddenly you love him. And this tweet that Woke Hoover shared is a microcosm of a broader trend I've seen from #resistance liberals. Quote, I adore Bush. I used to despise him, but I was misguided. Trump put things into perspective for me. Bush was a patriot, but made poor decisions. Trump intentionally screws America. And George W. Bush wasn't trying to intentionally screw us by lying us into a war that killed hundreds of thousands of Iraqis that we're still involved in? I mean, look, make no mistake about it. If you want to compare Donald Trump and George W. Bush, I think it's clear that Donald Trump is much dumber than George W. Bush, but he has yet to do even a fraction of the damage that George W. Bush caused. Give him time and maybe he will. But at this point, to say that George W. Bush was better than Donald Trump and to even go as far as to call him a patriot, if you are a liberal and you believe this shit, you've lost your fucking mind.
Support this podcast by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Humanist Report.